Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here, and get ready for Gnosis. Well, here's another chapter in the continuing information on the tall greys, the Charles James Hall story and his supposed contact with extraterrestrials. Now, the fifth volume of the Millennium Hospitality, Volume 5, and the last one published as far as I know, there are no other ones after this, is about the Greys, and it tells you absolutely nothing. As I said, it's kind of a conglomeration of a lot of bad information put together poorly, and further gaining his kind of low-level understanding of life and most of anything else. I mean, this is very disappointing, and the conclusions he draws are extremely low level and seem to be someone who is obsessive about children. Now, one of the problems with that is let's also understand when these were written and what was happening and whom he is. One of the things is that he has 6 children. Okay? He has 6 children. And he now has 13 grandchildren. So obviously, people that tend to have lots of children and get involved in their life and so forth, this becomes your life. It's a lot of children. He was concerned about making money. He supposedly has all these high degrees, and everybody loved him. I mean, all the officers just couldn't say how much great he was and how he did his job better than everybody else, and graduated from all these the classes he took, even though he stated someone got better grades than him. Well, that's kind of strange as well if he's so bright. He got nowhere in the military. He didn't get past, from what I can see, airman first class. So he spent 2 years doing all this stuff. Everybody loved him. And the military is all about getting rank. I didn't expect him to make him on the spot officer. And there's something within the book that also is contradictory about that as well, is that he was educated, but he was too nice to make it through officer school. Well, I don't get that. There's a lot of weird stuff that you run into. He wasn't educated. That came after his military involvement in Vietnam. But needless to say, he got no rank. He was just an airman, went to Vietnam, was put in a hot zone. A lot of this just doesn't add up. Now, this book talks about the Greys and all the conclusions, and now we know a fair amount of course, what's been written about the Greys. We really don't know. There's so many different types of Greys. They're atmospheres, but we don't know where they're coming from. There's types. There's Roswell Greys. There's tall Greys, which are insinuated now. The tall, larger Greys could be the tall whites. There's but the whites that he talks about are very humanoid looking, while the larger Greys are not. There's also a lot of very short Greys, and there's been so many speculation about the Roswell. It goes into the Roswell crash like he would know anything. This was way before his time. There's also some very strange stuff in this book, and I'm going to go through it. As I said, there was that comment about him going to officer candidate school, but was too nice of a guy to go in there. What? There's also a statement here which is totally outrageous. Of course, all of this book is outrageous and tends to have me doubt his stories in general. First of all, as we look back at the entire series, there's very little information there. He doesn't ask any questions. He has no information. Now there's some statements, I believe, online that say these tall whites were from Arcturus. Whatever that means. He stated they didn't tell him that. His involvement seems to be of someone who is kind of goofy that the military found a use for, because he was able to overcome his fear of the tall whites and kind of work with them. And of course, they made sure that he didn't stay there doing that. They moved him over to this other area. Again, I don't know. One of the problems of judging some of the military information is that I've never been in the military. From the people I've talked to in the military, It's a goofball, stupid organization ran by a bunch of fools, meaning that they handle people very strangely. And of course, they use and abuse you at will. Here's a guy everybody loved. He was so great, a great mathematician. Let's give him an M16 and put him in a rice paddy. Well, as absurd as that may sound, that is very classically military. But I can't go over the military details because I never was in there. But there's a lot of really weird military stuff, and I'm sure a military person could read this and judge, does this kind of fit in? But as he said, he's got 13 grandchildren, 6 of his own children. So the whole idea is, he's writing these things at this time. He's trying to, apparently, trying to make money. I'm not really sure why, with his advanced degrees and everything else. So I'm not sure what his career is. He claims to be a nuclear physicist now, a data processing person. All of these things are in high demand and should make excellent money from it. He went to, claims to, in the back of the book there, he shows a certificate. First of all, he shows his Air Force enlistment certificates and certification of training. Now, someone on YouTube looked into this, and, what does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. He posted a few things, put together a really bad YouTube video. The sound is bad, everything's bad on it. Does that mean the information is bad? This guy didn't seem to want to put much time into it. But he said that you can check military records to a degree, apparently. There are things online you can go and find out, was this guy in the military? Now, you may not be able to get personal military records, but you certainly can find out if someone served, apparently. Now, I'm not going to spend hours and days doing this. My time is too valuable to check these things. His conclusion, and a letter he posted on that YouTube actual story, is the fact they had no record of him whatsoever. Interesting. Does that prove anything? No. Certainly they could have wiped him out of the military records, and this happened to Bob Lazar and other people who we can't find any education or military background. So the fact that the military proves that or not, but it certainly is another check in the box of him having less credibility to some degree. He has, as I said, a California State University, San Diego. There isn't any dates on it, which I find interesting. Is that typical on a certificate? I don't really remember those types of things. That he has a Master of Arts in Physics. Isn't that a science? I don't know. I don't know if any of this is real or not. I'm assuming that when you put up something as obnoxious as this, he's also got his discharge papers here. So you would think all this stuff could be, if you wanted to spend the time to find out, is this guy or was this guy in the military, and does he really have a Master's of Arts in Physics from UC San Diego? Now, he doesn't have his Master's in Business Administration and other schools that he went to. He only posted that one for whatever reason, which I again find kind of odd. Why not give us all the information so we have a little better background with all that? So I have a problem with that as well. But the information is there for whatever that is. It looks good. As I said, can you actually check any of that out? I guess you could to a degree. He now lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a known area of military density and secret companies and all the other, with White Sands Naval Base there and so many other things, and where there's a grouping of people that have these kinds of interests. So, I mean, a lot of this gets to be very questionable. I mean, this last book is kind of a joke. As I said, everything with him is kids. Kids are flying around. Now, and his interpretation of what's happening with the GREYS and their involvement with human kids from around the world was the fact that the GREYS were helping finding and saving human kids. What? How is that part of their... How would they possibly do that? He notes Americans, and particularly some Chinese. He also notes the fact of their children, how fragile they are in general. And he's always talking about how fragile all these extraterrestrials are and how they have problems with the environment. Well, that may very well be true. And They certainly, I don't know if you'd call them fragile from my understanding, but they certainly are far from big, powerful entities as we would consider a physical, powerful earth being that you would fear. They're more skilled. So that's strange as well. So, and his interpretation is they were helping, and they had lots of children around. These were human children, or were they hybrids? Was this an entire gray alien manipulation of the... and that's how I interpret it all. He's interpreting it from a very childlike attitude, which he is notorious for. His kind of autistic way of looking at things, his daddy reality with all his kids and everything else. He was writing this book for his grandchildren. So he wasn't going to talk sex talk. He wasn't going to talk violence. He wasn't going to make it in any way scary. He was going to report basic facts. And what was he going to tell his grandchildren? Well, you know, there's alien children out there, little ones, and they play like you. Maybe someday you can go out and play with the little alien. Just be careful. The tall grays, otherwise known as the whites, have little pencils that'll fry your eyes out. So the whole idea is that all these things that come here, and the fact that there was intermixing, again, there's intermixing of children. He went into the, in the last volume, not this one, but the one before it, talking about the tall grays again, how human children were playing with these extraterrestrials, the tall white children. Well, I wonder how that child's doing in this day and age. Talk about a shocking thing. You have to be an extremely well-adjusted child to be able to do that. And apparently that child was alone. It wasn't a group of children, not a couple people. It was one human mixed in with all the others. No sensey there, mister. Me don't get it. It doesn't add up. The fact that he keeps referencing children. Now, it does make sense in the Greys here, if you want to look at what we know what they've been up to. They're interbreeding, they're using of babies. We have hundreds of reports of people who have been abducted, taken up, and shown human babies. Even Angela Thompson, the famous remote viewer and semi-celebrity who's written many different books, I'm not sure where she's coming from and how good that information is not. I mean, she certainly is sincere, but she's very metaphysical, a little bit too much so. Another odd person, but who would be normal when you go through these things? I'm sure people think I'm odd. But the point is that she states about being years and years of contacts with these Greys, and then her latest contact that she remembers was taking on board a ship, and they were trying to figure out how to feed the babies. They couldn't do it, and the babies were kind of just tossed in a pile someplace. Now, this makes sense to a degree, and of course that's how you would treat animalistic babies. We do this all the time, even though a lot of zoos in this day and age, in particular, and animal sanctuaries, these are other things that none of the extraterrestrials like, because they're so fragile, they generally just kill anything that's an animal. They have no use for it. Apparently they're not eating animal flesh, meaning there's no raising of animals, and of course all that makes sense. You can have cattle on a ship. Yeah, go out and move them cattle from floor 2 to floor 3. Doesn't make much sense if you're going to physically grow animals to eat them. Doesn't make sense doing that, period. And of course, there's major problems with that. It means you have to have an entire structure of animal husbandry, raising, slaughtering. What do you do with all this? Doesn't make much sense. And that's why in Star Trek they use a replicator. I want a burger. Click here. Oh, well, nothing to worry about there. So apparently he states that all of these extraterrestrials were vegetarians. And secondly, the Greys did not get along with the tall whites, which again, the tall whites are more of a... there are tall Greys. This is where everything gets all mixed in there. I don't think he gets it. I think he seems to be confusing very small Greys, thinking that they're children because they're so small. It's only 3 feet. It's a kid. So, It seems to be the impression I get. But, I mean, it fits into this guy's kind of mentality. And the fact is, if he is educated, if these are real, doesn't mean that he's got a mind. I've met a lot of these super sophisticated, educated people, not sophisticated, but educated. And the bottom line is that they're kind of stupid. They are kind of autistic. Give them 14 pages of mathematical equations, and they're in heaven. And they do that job well. Ask them to fix, change a light bulb, and they're lost. Well, you better call somebody. So we don't know, but this book really, all he's doing is talking about information that doesn't make any sense, that he doesn't apparently have any direct information from. He's kind of guessing, maybe he's heard something, this or that. You have to wonder, of course, maybe they wanted this semi-autistic, goofy guy to be this contact. They wanted him to go to this new location, and he wanted to do his same weather balloon nonsense that they always do, because they wanted him to be seen and doing safe things every day, so that the Greys would see him as just a flunky out there doing his job, and they would trust him, which apparently, since it worked with the tall whites, certainly would work with anybody else. And of course, that's exactly what happened. But then he goes into some of the most ridiculous statements that I've ever heard. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And he does come out with some interesting ideas of what these crafts could be and what he saw, that they're fiber optic type crafts. And that does make sense. I mean, they're glowing white balls in space, which make them very noticeable. But I think part of that is that's deliberately done. They certainly can cloak themselves, look like clouds. I mean, this again, through the many, many years of UFO research, seems to be the case. On the other hand, these glowing white balls, which seem to be very typical of UFOs, may mean the fact that they're using these kind of fiber optics designs which create very powerful, energetic, subatomic fields. This makes sense in the bigger picture, but that's just, his personal understandings and conclusions, and maybe he saw something like that. But his personal conclusions are goofy. They're stupid. They don't make any sense. And you got to remember, all this happened in a couple of years before he was traumatized by Vietnam. He didn't keep any records. This is stuff he remembered. And of course, how much was a writer's addition to it, even though he claims none of that. But come on. And there's endless pages of his boring day-to-day business, which is just, it's hard to get through. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of details. Things jump around. He doesn't give you a cohesive story until the 5th volume, where he starts talking about how you'd expect a book to be written. So what he finally does in the Grey here is he goes into the actual last chapter. He finally starts talking about more of a detailed account of contact with extraterrestrials. So, talking about what they are, what they're doing. And of course, it's all centered around the kids. And the kids are given spacecrafts and they're going out there and playing. But the spacecrafts aren't too good. Their communications aren't too good. Their line of sight communication. All the kids and teenagers are let to roam around like some hoodlums, buzzing the world. Not only that, apparently he claims that the Greys, through watching TV, I didn't say that, but movies and what was popular then, I guess back then there was a Rebel Without a Cause. Was that what they call a chicken scene, where two people go head on into each other and until one person pulls off? I don't know if that was the case. I think they did that with a cliff or something. Apparently the Grey kiddies liked that movie and started imitating it. So they would go after jets and cars and other things and play chicken with them. What? And how did they even understand that? I mean, that's a pretty cultural thing. And quite bizarre, dangerous, and doesn't make much sense. He claims that all the Roswell incident were just teenagers that got lost and had problems, and the adults couldn't find them fast enough, didn't know where they are. They can navigate from 1,500 light years away. Well, I'm kind of confused by the California deserts. And you know that That New Mexico? Woo, look out, kids. We got no maps. So all the things that go with that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And again, because they're small, he claims that these are all children. And of course, this is not the case. Nobody has ever stated this before. As a matter of fact, nobody has stated they've ever seen extraterrestrial children that I'm aware of, unless they're this hybrid program. I mean, there isn't too much talk about family structures, and nor would you be abducting or handling people and bringing them into your home and subjecting your children to a bunch of goofball humans who are nasty, deadly, diseased, mentally and physically. But with him, the kids are just playing all over the place. I don't know. It just doesn't sound to me to be real. It doesn't sound to me that people who are so violent and protective like the tall Greys would allow their children to do what they're doing and to be so out there. Even the fact of losing one that he had to find. Oh, there he is again. I get his grandkids would love that. You know, kiddies, one of the little kids, like you, got lost. And you know what old granddaddy did here? Well, I knew there was... So I went out looking for this, and guess what? Your little old granddaddy here was able to find and save one of them alien kids. And they liked me, and the generals patted me on the back, but never gave me anything but one strap. I was so smart and great, and my IQ was so high they couldn't match that with any kind of rank. No, they gave it to the other guy who was basically illiterate. They made him a sergeant, which could be the military. So the whole idea is this is the kind of stuff that starts not to make sense. I will give this more thought, and we'll see what happens in the future as, things have to sink in, think about it, go into your higher self, your inner magical being, to try and make sense of this. It's easy to either give things credit quickly because of the humanistic values to it, or disregard it as just kind of silly. Both of those are poor ways of looking at things. But, the more you get from people, and this should have been 1, maybe 2 books, has turned into 5 for one reason and one reason only, and that's to make money. There's nothing here. He talks about crafts and how they work, but he never talked about going on crafts. He observed some crafts when he was stationed in places. He didn't talk too much about getting close to them or anything else. Apparently, he wasn't even able to. All of a sudden, now he has some intimate knowledge of crafts and how they work. There's also a very bizarre statement here about the Roswell crash, in terms of him having contact with wreckage from the craft when he was in grade school. It was brought to him. What is this? So while he was in grade school in the 1950s, Roswell debris was brought to him and showed to him, which had this fiber optic stuff. What? So he's a poor little kid, a farmer's kid. He goes into his background there, and this was brought to him. Well, as a person involved in the occult sciences, well, we could say, well, this was something that was predestined for him to do, and he was chosen, and he was going to do this in the future. This doesn't make any sense, though. This guy is not connected to this. He's a raving Christian who basically everything that's happened to him, he just thinks is part of God's plan. There's nothing strange about it. And it reaffirms his belief, certainly doesn't shake it, which I think is important for everybody to know. I've mentioned that before, but there's always been talk that the proof of extraterrestrials will shake the foundations of religion. I don't think that's the case, period. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody. The only thing that's going to be said is exactly what he and his wife said. And the fact is that, God made them, God made me. It doesn't change anything. The Bible is great. Everything in there is the same thing. So he's not getting literature from them. He's not talking theology with them. He's not, they're just like us. They follow the golden. I've heard that 100 times as well. Whatever that means. Of course, I'm not sure what we're expecting extraterrestrials to say anyway. So So he's saying that these crashes, that they were all children aboard the Roswell crash, and that was it. Now, there's been a lot of stories. There's been stories that these were actually came from the Roswell crash were actually freaks, shaven bodies from the Japanese who sent a ship over there. Now, I don't care how oddly human-looking they are. They're still human-looking, and they would have had genitalia and everything else identify them as humans. But people say that that was a crash of this Japanese ship who were sending things over at that time as well. But you got to remember, Roswell was after World War II, so it doesn't make too much sense there. Others said that this was some mutant freaks from Russia, and that was what crashed there as well. Again, mutant freaks are very identifiable, and they could be used regular medical. From what I understand from all the reports, which are hazy, confused, as is wanted to be by those in authority, so you can always have all sorts of questions, is that they were unable to heal them because they were not the same as us. While they were biological entities, I remember reading one report stating that where they were more vegetable in nature and that they had to put them out into the sun and they started to heal and get better. But they really didn't know how to help or treat them, so they ended up dying. Because they were small, they're children, he's saying, basically. Who crashed their ship, and the parents don't know how to find them, and they don't have good guidance and everything else. As I said, they can come from 100 light years away, but they can't. They don't have good systems or ships to handle when they get into other places. Now, it seems to me that that is quite absurd. And the fact that you would allow your children to go out and get into problems like this because they're wild kids, all hopped up on space juice and weed from Argon, where you smoke it and get high and then get into your crab. Yeah. So the whole idea is that this kind of stuff is just absurd. The fact that he said he saw debris when he was, I don't know if it's high school or before that, is another absurd statement. So the whole idea is, what are we supposed to make of that? I mean, this is the kind of statements. As I said, there was that statement about him dropping out of officer candidate school because he was too smart. Well, he never went to college. He wanted to stay in the military to go to college and then has these different degrees. So I don't know what that really means. It's very, very strange. And again, this is all in there. He's got, he has no pictures. He has nothing of anything. He's got a few people that think that they've encountered similar beings. Now, the tall whites are not your classically tall grays. Now, there's tiny grays, big grays, medium grays, everything. So it's very confusing. The tall whites are more Nordic looking, but they're as whitish as sheet. They have giant eyes. So you better have big sunglasses and lots of makeup if you're going to blend in. And if you're over 6 foot, you're pretty much going to stand out wherever you go. Now, it took a while for them to grow this. So a lot of things, again, just don't add up. And the so-called mixing, even when they went to check on a person they had hurt using their, the tall whites, using their weapons, how did they find this guy? How did they talk to him? How did they gain? Well, probably we could extrapolate on this, as they said talk, but most likely they psychically tuned into that person to find out what they were thinking. But to physically go out and do that and then come to the conclusion that he was just faking it to get on government payroll, well, that certainly could be. But how did all that happen? And how were they able to connect with it? So, and there's all these psychic elements that he doesn't look at because he's a very shallow person. He's a religious person. So he's not looking for people and abilities and saying, well, they're psychic. No, they had some electrical gadget in there. Shoot. So we have these things. So it's, but his kind of obsessive, constantly going back to children, but this is what he said the Greys were doing, but they were helping. They weren't kidnapping, breeding, and everything else, which of course would make sense. And they're setting up some sort of child relocation base to help human children in the middle of the desert where there's no place to help them, or even if it's in that location, which of course never happened, and certainly not something that the military does, as far as I understand. They can't even figure out what to do in war zones. So why that would be? Now, this was a hybrid program where children were being manipulated. As I said, it's been actually verified. And Angela Thompson, the prolific writer, seer, and the remote viewing civilian who's worked in that industry and continues to be out there, worked at Princeton labs and everything else, talked about being taken on ships and seeing them. What are we to make of this? And that she's had constant contact with extraterrestrials. Well, I don't know how real that is either. But the disregard of treating babies like puppies and them not knowing how to feed them must have mean they had a stack of dead bodies. You don't feed babies or people, they die. And they didn't know how to do it. They had no idea whatsoever, which again seems to me to be strange. They can't access that information. They can't watch a mother feeding a baby. They had to abduct her again and bring her up there. They didn't have any kind of infant tool. So it was just, well, and this, of course, has happened with a lot of things. I mean, this happened with research that was done by the Nazis on people that they did, and they just let them die. Oh, well, we need another 150 people. These died because we didn't bother to handle them correctly. So it's not like this is necessarily unusual. This has been documented in military documents. So the whole idea is that this is a common way of disregarding lower species or people you don't like. So what are we to make of all this? Well, this brings in a lot of other questions and as well, which I'm not going to go into here. But how strange. He was shown a piece of the Roswell crash in the middle 1950s. So, and they brought it to him, and he looked at it. I keep repeating that because it's just so mind-blowing. And as I said, that's in the book. So you just can't jump over that. I mean, it's hard going through this book because it's so ridiculous in terms of the fact of how it's put together. I drove my car. The car was fun. I slept in the truck. Blah, blah, blah. I went and got some food. I mean, all this stuff. Who cares, buddy? Who cares the kind of balloons, what you were doing, etc.? I mean, it's there. Everyone can understand that. But, that's like 70% of these books. It's just the same old stuff. There isn't very many communication with anybody else. His so-called great appreciation from officers and everybody you work with who thought he was a genius and how wonderful he was. Good stories for the kiddies. Very good stories. He was not given anything. His reward was no increase in rank whatsoever. And of course, rank means increase in pay and all sorts of things. He was further rewarded by being put in a horrible war zone. Why didn't he get a cushy job? Why did he go to Vietnam in general? Doesn't make much sense to me unless they're trying to kill him so that he would no longer be a witness. If you're going to reward somebody, which is noted throughout his books, we'll send you to Hawaii because, there's air bases in Hawaii. And, of course, I can't think of any better place to go to generally, especially if you're going on leave, etc. And, of course, Hawaii is known as a place where there's lots of military and lots of leave going on. He talks about how the crafts overheat and melt and how there's problems with the crafts and how they're functioning. Again, they come from hundreds of light years away, but they get into the atmosphere and they've got faulty crafts. And, of course, this is what happened at Roswell. So we don't know what happened there. It has been speculated that the reason those crafts crashed was because of some new radar being used that the extraterrestrial ships didn't quite understand. And affected their engines and caused them to crash. And there's more than one ship crashed, I believe. There's been talk of anywhere from 2 to 3 ships crashing at Roswell. There's also been talk of UFOs being knocked out of the sky by Wilhelm Reich, who was using orgone-type energy systems in the desert. And again, in the desert again. And of course, that fits, but that's nothing new. But he's talking about bad maintenance, ships that don't, bad communication, kids that don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's so outrageous that it could possibly be true, that they're just unorganized stumble bums. But his fascination and preoccupation with children all the time, based on the fact that he has a whole bunch of children. I'm sure his wife's a children nut, and then he has all these grandchildren, which he's writing. The whole idea is to write these books as a little tome for them, and I'm not sure why, but he wanted to pass on what he experienced it and keep it within the family to special people. And of course, he's not going to talk about anything that's controversial, freaky, or scary. This is meant to be given to children and what he went through for some sort of, I don't know, does that fit with the talking mouses and pigs and all the other things that we think is perfectly acceptable to have children exposed to, which I am very much against. So here we go again with all these things of what do we make of this. But this last book, all the interpretations, from what I can tell, are wrong. He has no idea what he's talking about. While there's a few interesting areas there, fiber optics, but of course, does that necessarily mean anything? It kind of makes sense if it's a glowing object in the sky. It wouldn't be just a radiating ball of energy. You'd be moving light beams around, which give you the capacity to go at tachyon speeds, faster than light, and that this all makes sense. And he's constantly attacking Einstein and his theories, saying how ridiculous they are, and that he didn't know all. Well, obviously he didn't know this, and science knows nothing. But of course, again, because he has a degree in physics, I guess this is something he falls back on, which he feels is ridiculous, that these types of things would happen, even going so far as I mentioned in the last audio, that the tall whites laughed hilariously at the fact of our science, and particularly Einstein's understanding of physics and not being able to go. Now, anything that you limit like that because you get stuck in some mathematical equation that tells you that is ridiculous. But welcome to the human world and those advanced scientists like Sean Carroll and his buddies who are running the physics world based with false understanding of everything. So the whole idea is that this information on the Greys doesn't fit anything. And we don't know what children are or not. And the fact that you would bring children and subject them or let them roam around in hostile environments is absurdity. If you care about your children, you'd be very careful. Now, the tall whites didn't watch them that closely either, in many instances, even though there did seem to be guards and other things he talks about, and they were very protective. Now, after all, they do have super abilities, they can't be shot and all the other things, particularly the tall whites. Now, the Greys apparently had trouble breathing in the Earth atmosphere and functioning in general. And of course, they again lived hundreds of years, but physically they had problems with this place. Another reason to get into some sort of biological engineering with the species that are here, otherwise known as abductions, otherwise known as using children as hybrids and moving them into it. So, if you look at his experiences and look at it from what we know better now, away from his sanctified, glossy, let's have nice, fun stories for the kiddies, some of this adds up in the fact that they're manipulating the human species. And this was not discussed in the tall whites and in the, quote, Nordics, whatever that means. Again, these are kind of gross over. The point is that they were very light in color. So the whole idea is that these things do add up to a degree, but they never talked about interacting with and being seen with humans, etc. They were all standoffish, particularly the tall whites, which, while had contact, it was at arm's length, and they were very leery, and they were very well armed because they found humans or earth beings to be very hostile. And of course, that makes sense. I mean, why would you possibly trust a human? Humans, the minute they fear something, they want to kill it. Whether that's a military, whether you're shooting at it, clubbing it, or whatever. So, but the point is why did the guards even need to carry weapons if bullets couldn't affect them? Did they need to kill you? You attack them, and they had weapons to kill you. Well, you can't affect you. What's the point? If they can affect you psychically, why just not knock that guy down? Why do you need a gun? That's so primitive. And this has not been recorded in too many extraterrestrial cases. And in my activities, I've never seen a typical, what would be called a weapon. They have things that are generated, what appear to be from psychic or even out of their body that may have been inserted in there, that then zap you, kind of like a ray gun. They don't carry in guns and guards and other things. This is part of what they understand. Secondly, some people, and they have been, in many instances, have been killed by conventional weapons if you catch them in the right area. At least this is how many stories go. On the other hand, most of the stories say you can't affect them. People have shot machine guns at them, and nothing happens. That makes a lot of sense, and shooting a bunch of little metal particles at a advanced race, that you'd think they'd be able to handle that. Isn't that just a little bit, a lot less than something you would encounter in space? Could be space rocks or junk. And you're going at certain speeds and you have different problems. Well, you think that not being affected by tiny bits of metal being shot at you at quasi-velocities would be something. Now, you couldn't hurt them. So a lot of these things don't make sense. Obviously, they're protective. Hey, granddaddy, just like I'm protective of you, little toddlers. A lot of things here. And, as I said, he comes off as kind of a simpleton to me. So this is the kind of story he would write, and these are the kind of things that he'd tell. So how much of this happened? It seems like he was dramatically, like everybody is, mentally affected by the horrific Vietnam War that Americans were forced to go into. Of course, he enlisted, but he got the great thank you from all his great work and all the generals who loved him by putting him in a war zone, a dangerous war zone. All of this, when we get involved in it, just doesn't make much sense. And something we have to look at. What do we do now? Can we confirm that he was or was not have any of these degrees there? In the back of the fifth book, as he said, we have these. It is interesting. There doesn't seem to be any dates on his degrees. So if you were to go there to UC San Diego, which is known as a... particularly, that university was built and funded by the U.S. military so they can do a lot of projects there. San Diego is almost an entire military town. So that's all part of it. So makes sense again that he would kind of end up there. Isn't that interesting? Well, it puts little pieces together, but it doesn't really complete the puzzle very well, and there's a lot of pieces that just don't fit at all. But a lot of this may be his wrong conclusions. Look at all the children. Yeah, look at all the abducted hybrid kids that are there. And of course, he never really figured that out. He was told another bogus. All the stories are bogus. They tell you all these things. But there certainly is plenty of stories, not only from Angela Thompson, but many others that were taken aboard ships and shown what were their babies. And apparently they knew how to feed them, and they were showing older children, etc. So this is something that's pretty common that they do. And you got to remember, I'm not sure why anybody would respect the human race. I mean, what does the human race do? Murder each other. We build good things. We got hospitals. We take care of each other. No. None of that. We build aircraft carriers. We build giant buildings for offices, for insurance buildings. So the whole idea is, what does all that mean? So we certainly can understand that, and I'm not sure why they should see us as any more than a human puppy that they breed, take care of for a period of time, and of course dispose of anytime they feel like it. And of course use it. After all, you're kind of a stupid race. What do we care? So, we'll grow some of you as pets in cages, and when we're sick of you, we'll eat you. So the whole idea is that when you get into all these things, the pieces don't fit together. His conclusions are naive, ignorant, and kind of fit what I get from this guy in his writings. And of course, he's writing a children's book here. That's what it was all about. I don't buy the information whatsoever in the last of this. I'm not sure what kind of contact he has with all these cases. We just don't know. One of the problems with him is that he's not getting any kind of information. The conclusions he makes about the Greys and the other are all based on information he knows nothing about. To state that these are kids that got lost and crashed, where does that come from? He's stating the fact that the Greys allowed their children and teenagers. How did he know the ages of them if they're small? Did he have that? He checked their handprints. Does he know their children? How do they work? They're wandering about. Yeah, he saw lots of kids who were abducted in hybrids in his last operation. And I think what happened there, and he was pulled out of there just by the fact that this was not a, quote, kosher organization. What was going on with these Greys was very nefarious and possibly dangerous. And he was apparently unable to get any kind of information. But to think all the kids are playing around, they're doing this, they're doing that. And apparently, as he said, they have problems breathing. They don't heal very well. They can be killed easily. But, you know, who isn't killed easily if you crash an airplane into the ground for whatever reason? And as he said, the story is people think that radar disrupted these. Wilhelm Reich, again, was using energetic fields that was disrupting the atmosphere. Now, this makes sense that if these different crafts running on a certain atmospheric empowerment would then crash because of that, and he well notes this in his experiments, etc. So, and it is pretty much thought that with the Roswell crash. It's also interesting that he ties all that in because it was Roswell who was sending up all these weather balloons, and that was their second report, that it was a weather balloon that really it was. And they showed the weather balloon, even though there seems to be debris and other things. Matter of fact, he saw debris before when he was a kiddie from Roswell. So all of this, of course, is like all of these stories, and it's the endless pursuit of gnosis. What is real? What is not? Is any of it real? Is none of it real? Is it his goofball interpretations we have to throw to the side? And that certainly is 100% true. His conclusions of kitties running around, I just can't get over that. But it does fit into his lifestyle and his huge involvement with children. And people look at their lives and then they judge everything from their lives. If you don't have children, well, you're not going to find too many stories of children in someone's life. They're not going to talk about that. But everything else is the cutie little picture of a kid, this or that, the photo album. So this makes sense that he's extrapolating this onto the extraterrestrials because they must need kids as well. Their life must be around that. I'm not sure you take kids into dangerous places. Now, we bring families to places where we stay for long periods of time in protective areas. I wouldn't think that general war zones or dangerous areas that families are brought into, but obviously if you're assigned to Europe, you're going to be able to bring your family there, and they have family housing. Yeah, but this is not a war zone, at least not directly. So the whole idea is that all of that is, and of course, then they stay on the base and never leave. I mean, it's very classic for, I don't know if it's probably everybody, but Americans in general who have bases that are just nothing more than a mini American city never leave it. They can be stationed at a place for 4 to 10 years, and they stay on the base. After all, it has everything. They're too fearful to go out into neighborhoods where they don't speak the language too well, or maybe not at all, but they don't mix, and they eat the same foods. They don't go outside the gate and buy local food, local shoes, local shirts. None of this happens to any large degree. Everything's provided for them at a discount in a very protective environment. You would think similar would happen if these extraterrestrials are so family-based and so similar to us. Well, why would their kids be flying around in our dangerous atmosphere, possibly crashing or being murdered and everything else? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So as we go into that, as you said, I will report back on their contact, which I kind of skimmed over apparently, because it's hard to go through these books. Who cares about what you're doing, feeling, and how many weather balloons you put up, and how you're so loved, and you're such a genius, and you're saving people. So, I mean, all this stuff is a great kiddie story. Your grandkids will love how wonderful you are, and how you saved all these pilots, and how smart you were, and how you passed the test, and how everybody loved you, but you never got any rank, you never got any good position. They kept you in an area because you were the only crazy fool who could handle dealing with these bizarre creatures who were dangerous and scary. So you were appointed the fool of the military because You did it while everybody else ran to their officers saying, I got to leave the military. I'm not going back there ever, and got their honorable discharges on a Section 8. And I'm not sure that a medical discharge is a Section 8. I thought a Section 8, which he states is for the good of the military, I thought that was a mental thing. You got a Section 8 because you were crazy. Is that honorable? And that's an honorable discharge. I don't know. As I said, I don't know all the military jive. But none of this stuff makes any sense. So all of these things, and they're not having good capacities against 50 caliber weapons and some of the ship stuff, it just don't make much sense, man. None of this does. And he doesn't seem to have written about or get involved in the fact of possible nefarious or negative activities done to the unworthy, or I should say worthy, humans to be treated poorly. As I said, there's no reason why you should necessarily trust or treat Earth beings well, but should you torture everything as well? So the whole idea is he seems to, because he was accepted only because they wanted to have a sucker there, someone that the extraterrestrials could trust, and of course they wanted him around, but they didn't sit there and say, hey, let's make sure we keep Charles here, we like him. No comments like that at all. You're talking about 2 years. 2 years is nothing. He had at least a 4-year hitch in the military, and he was so valuable and so bright, they made sure they put him in a Viet Cong dominated territory so he could get his proverbial intelligence shot up. Don't make no sense to me. And certainly it would be interesting to see his records and everything else and how valid any of this is. But, you're never going to get any of that. The fact that there's no proof that he was in the military, well, what does that mean? Putting together stuff at the back of a book you can do anywhere with any computer. Doesn't take much work to make documents. It's very easy to do that and put your name on it. These don't look too credible to me either, to be honest with you. They're pretty primitive certificates, but maybe that's what it is. They do have millions of these, so they ain't going to be fancy. So the whole idea, even though I don't particularly like the physics master in physics, because it doesn't look like a particular document, nor is there special things to attach to it, which I find strange as well. Usually they have little things attached. These are known for certificates to make them look fat, embossed, gold embossing, etc., with little badges and other things on them. So it doesn't seem to have any of that. Of course, it's hard to tell with these black and white pictures here. So all of it doesn't add up, people. It's another one of these things. There's really no new information here. What he's saying is that there are extraterrestrials of several types. This is, of course, something that has been verified by others. They claim that, and I've mentioned this already, but I'll mention it again. On UFOs, people have stated that they've seen the Nordics. They've stated, and of course, he doesn't talk about them, the more reptilian, which basically are greys, by the way. They have reptilian skin. I think that's a misnomer, but of course people have quoted that they've seen very reptilian looking, and greys, and that these are all mixed together. Some people have said the Nordics run it. Other people say that the reptilians run it as well. Other people have said that the greys run it. People have also said they've seen in that group the insectoids have been on these as well. This is what the PK man said that he got his information from, were these praying mantis type. But, that seems to be less and less out there. They were popular for a period of time, and I'm not sure why. It seems to me that would be quite frightening to see a giant insect and communicate with it, especially praying mantises, which are kind of scary looking. So the whole idea is that this is nothing new. So what he's saying is that they're here, they're in bases, there's these 3 types that he ran into. We know there's probably more like 58 different species coming to this planet. Maybe hundreds have come here for one reason or another, or use us as their recreational area, or just come here to check it out. After all, from what we can tell in most other, at least, planets in our galaxy, or at least in our solar system, or I should say especially, there ain't nothing out there. I mean, there aren't certainly cultures. Now, whether that's fascinating, whether you want to go look at frozen areas or the desolation of Mars, well, I don't know if that tweets their whistle or not. But the point is that there ain't nothing out there. Obviously, the difference between flying into Earth and seeing all the ants running about, blowing things up, destroying things, and having pizza and chocolate, if you can eat those things, certainly is much better than sucking on moon dust or Martian Earth. even though apparently there are underground bases all over these places. And the moon itself is very strange and weird. Some people say it's even hollow. It shouldn't be there. It may have been put there to help the Earth environment, doing the effects that the moon does. It is kind of strange, it is kind of big, and it don't make much sense. And of course, we don't want to look at it too close. So the whole idea is that all of this makes this whole subject. But it's important. It's important that these are some sort of empowered entities. Now, whether his story is true or not doesn't really matter. What are these entities? How can we contact them? Will they empower us? We do know that they are extremely powerful psychically. We do know they have powerful technologies. They can affect people. They can move at great speeds. They can master levitation and teleportation. They can protect themselves. This can be extrapolated. They can manipulate gambling games. Hey, buddy, give me a call. I could have used some of them dough. So the whole idea is that these kind of things make it very intriguing. And we're going to talk about that. I did a little discussion on this recently, but the point is that what is all these energies? And we're always trying to seek, how we can be empowered. And we're going to talk about the different ones. There's ancestors that have power. There's spirits. Are they God forms? Are they the angels? Are this? We don't know. It seems to me I believe there is some connection there. But there are other spirits that they're not connected to, including our own species that leaves an energetic signature here, and you can contact after someone dies. That's 100% proven. There's also the bizarre life cycle that's been reincarnation has been 100% proven. Here we go again. So life after death, reincarnation is a fact. We know that. There's tons of research even done very recently, not to mention the 150 years that's been done on this in general. But what is the individual things? So, as a occult scientist, as a manifesting scientist seeking high levels of empowerment, we must look into this question which continues to plague us over and over again. What do all the remote viewers state? They had extraterrestrial contact or visions or seen ships. What does Uri Geller said? He was zapped by a Martian. Now, is this real or not? But, that was in that. In the 60s, even when this guy wrote this stuff, there still was and past that, there was a big extraterrestrial push. There was contact. And that was even before all this was that popular. Supposedly, Andrei Pusharik, who found Uri Geller and worked with him for many years researching with him and testing him, had contact with extraterrestrial groups that were coming there. They turned themselves into computers and they lived 1,000 years. The stories are similar, and they were coming and gonna land. Man, is their flight overdue, because that was 1966, just like his stories. I guess they found another port in the storm. So all of this doesn't make much sense, and there never isn't. I've heard the fact of they're coming for 30 and 40 years now. Different groups, and they never show up. And why would they possibly do that? Getting involved with humans in any kind of personal way is detrimental to your society. Now, if you can mix because you look good, if you want to make hybrids, well, all that makes sense. You're not going to get involved with crazy maniacs that have horribly destructive weapons that are known for their rape, murder, and torture, the kind of things that humans do. So how is that going to help? And even if you meet good people, what's going to happen? Help me, I need this. This is dying, that's dying. I need help, I need empowerment. What are you going to do? Cure everybody? And that's all you're going to do all day because they're crying and they're losing the most precious things in their lives. They want money. They want to manipulate it. They'll capture an alien, a mafia, and other ones and use them for criminal. Do you understand the filth of the human race? Well, if you don't, wake up. So why would you possibly do that? So anybody that says aliens are coming and they're going to intermix and so forth. Now, even contact with governments, which is the way you would do it on the sly, do it underground for exchange of what? Apparently, here's another thing, they like exchanging with us. I don't know. They like Hershey bars, Snickers. Is that all part of what they need to get here? And, there isn't much talk of that. There isn't talk about their sexuality. They have children. They're screwing. What about that? There isn't much talk about what they eat, other than the fact that he mentions once that they were all plant eaters and that they had no use for animals and they were afraid of them because they're so fragile, so they kill everything. Again, that's shocking to humans who try and respect the natural life here. They don't. That is something negative to them, and they don't care, and they don't need animals or that kind of environment, so they'll just waste them. But there isn't much talk. I mean, he's mentioned that in his book a couple of times, I believe, of their adversity to regular animals, even though there's no talk about insects, disease, or other things that you would think they'd be more concerned with. And again, they talk about being plant-based. Well, what is plant-based? What are they eating? What is going on here with all of that? So none of that has gone into, and I would think that would be something. And of course, if someone came in your place, you had stuff out, well, this is kind of something that would come up. I mean, the normal thing that most people do, even though people are getting ruder and more cruder, is you offer somebody food and drink. That never came up. I can get you some soda at the PX. You want a Snicker bar? Kind of cool. Nothing. Doesn't make sense. Okay? So none of that is discussed. While there are children and women supposedly running around, there seems to be no discussions of breeding and sexuality. How do they have birth? How do they have sex? Well, this is kind of just a common thing that I think everybody would be curious of, especially since it's so dominant in Earth beings' lives. So here we go again. None of the important stuff, but, old Charles will do. Ooh, there's kids around. Let's party. Let's play. You got little tricycles? I'm surprised you didn't go out and get basketballs and kickballs and give it to the kids. I mean, this is the kind of mentality it's down to. And that the fact that the GREYS are so stupid, they let their dumb teenagers, the untrained kids, go out and fly things. And I don't know where that comes from at all. He's trying to say because they're small, they were children. And again, what does he know about Roswell, which took place 20 years almost? Not almost. Well, let's see. What was that? It happened in 46, 48? I'm not sure. So the whole idea is that, he was in the military until 1968. And, of course, most of his activities. So you're talking about, to round things out, 20 years previous. And he's got all this stuff about Roswell. Why? Because that was a big topic in the last 5 to 10 years that he made a book about. Because that's what people were curious. Well, what about the Roswell stuff? What about the GREYS? Well, all of a sudden, he knows all about that as well. Doesn't add up whatsoever. I don't buy it. I don't buy this contact. I don't buy his interpretations because I don't see him having good interpretations. He does tend to try and wax intellectual, talks about his feelings, talk about how things are interpreted. And of course that makes sense. You're going through something very traumatic, and if you're a thinker, which he appears to be on certain levels, you would say, well, how are you reacting to this? What does this mean? But, the lack of data here, the fact that there are no pictures, there are no great drawings, none of his books have anything in them. There are illustrations, which apparently his wife put together, his picture, which is the same picture on all 5 volumes. Him standing in what appears to be overalls of an Air Force-y type in the middle of the desert, which we're assuming is Nellis Air Force Base, but we don't really know. There doesn't seem to be much there in general. Again, there isn't much information there. Other people have stated that there wasn't a record of him and that he was claiming awards that were not due him, and that this is actually illegal, and he doesn't do that anymore because it is illegal. And the pictures of him are very poor. They seem to be the same picture that's on every one of this. Doesn't really show any Air Force insignias very well. It doesn't really give us anything, and the background picture could be anywhere. It almost looks like there are houses behind him. It's really hard to say. Looks like he's in some sort of desert area. It could be Palm Springs with houses behind him. It's hard to say what that is, leaning up against some sort of structure there. You can't really see the front of his uniform with his name on it, and you can't see badges. You can't see anything else. I mean, there's a lot of really crappy stuff here. He has some other pictures, your typical army-type pictures or military-type pictures there, which again prove absolutely nothing. So I'm not sure what any of that means. So, if we don't have enough information, what is he trying to tell us through all these books? Well, he wrote these books. I don't know how much money he's made. They're all available on Amazon. I just gave him a lump of money. I don't know, all 5 books cost me like $40-50 through Kindle. So he's making some money in there. If there's thousands of people doing that, well, you can make some decent money that way. And I don't know if he was more popular in the past. Did they pay him for the movie that they just did, the documentary? I don't know. Certainly, I bought the books because I saw the documentary, which is even, I think it's Amazon or Netflix, I'm not sure. I do recommend everybody watch that. What does it all mean? Is it done strictly for money? Of course, that's what it's insinuated from day one. You're unemployed, we should get these books out. That's what his wife said. So I didn't really hide that. There's a lot of sketchy stuff here that doesn't add together. He wants to show that he was in the military, but what he's showing there is not very good, and background checks tend not to be coming up with anything right now until we can get more information. Doesn't seem to be, all the documents he's showing is not enough. He's got all these advanced degrees, yet he's not showing it. He's supposed to have a master's in business administration. Well, why didn't he put that certificate up there? So I don't know why he would only show his physics, but of course a physics degree is what he's trying to clarify, that he is smart. I have physics degree from college. Looky here, my name on paper. So the whole idea is that he's trying to do that so he comes off as an educated scientific person who can judge these things. Well, as I've mentioned time immemorial over and over again, that proves absolutely nothing, and the conclusions which a so-called educated scientific person comes up with really has no validity when it has to deal. As a matter of fact, it's negative. The bottom line is asking Sean Carroll, the mucky-muck theoretical physicist, what his opinion is of real energetic informational fields is like talking to a clown. He'll beep his little red nose and put on the big shoes, and he's a joke because it doesn't fit into his reality, and he has going to take 0 time studying it, even though there's 150 years of research done by noted scientists in the area. He hasn't read a single paper. So is his opinion good, bad? Well, it's bad. You don't want to ask that guy anything outside of what's already in the books. And quite frankly, I don't need his opinion. I'll read a book on physics. He's not giving any new information. So here we go again with the whole bigger mess and the whole bigger picture. What does all this mean? Where does this take us? What is going on? But here we go yet again. So he's given us no information. We know nothing about their ships, how they're operating. The fact that maybe, and I'm sure he considers from his point of view, that this is something new and unique, that the U.S. government has been working with extraterrestrials closely, and that there's a lot of, well, this is kind of old hat, by the way. This has been talked about for a long time. They believe that Eisenhower met with extraterrestrials, signed contracts, etc., and so did probably others. But it's almost been confirmed that these things happened, and that there has been this. We do know that the United States military has anti-gravity technology, and ironically, it's kind of crappy in terms of the fact that if you get caught in a thunderstorm, it don't work well. Now, I have had proof of this myself by witnessing it, but I heard someone talk about this on a UFO show, that this system has that weakness. Well, I proved it because there was a giant thunderstorm and the craft had to get out of there and come down in a very deserted location, which I just happened to be at. So we know that. If they have anti-gravity, then all these other things are real as well. We can just go on and on and on. And the fact is that his little stories here kind of fit in with everything else. It also is generally stories of people who are relatively friendly. He keeps trying to humanize them with their children stuff. Children everywhere. Their children, their mothers, their father. I'm not sure what that means. Everybody loves their children, and they're more than happy to murder other people's children. So it doesn't make them more trustworthy. The fact that they have some sort of family unit and are humanoid makes sense. And I've talked about this before. The only species that can make anything, and basically the reason why anybody progresses is they have to make tools. Tools then make machines. You can't do that if you have the super superior mind of an elephant or a tiger, because you don't have hands that grip things. In terms of intelligence, survivability, and physical force, humans don't do well in any of that. Humans are actually weak, fragile, and kind of freaky in a world which is really tough and violent. I mean, people think of even chimpanzees, which are approximately 2.5 feet or so, maybe even smaller. Anybody knows anything about chimpanzees knows how nasty those little buggers are. And they can rip your face off and beat the hell out of a 6-foot guy who is even physically fit or even very muscular. They have unbelievable strength.
What does a human have? Ooh, I can lift up by 1/2 ounce.
You are so inferior, and why is that? Has mankind been bred to be inferior? Why do you lose hair? Why do we lose hair on the top of our head and then it grows on the rest of your body? Why do we have hair in certain places in general? None of this really makes sense, and certainly you would think that if we would have more hair to protect us from what is pandemic, which is skin cancer supposedly coming from the sun. So it goes on and on and on with all of this. Humans are freaks. Who put humans here, I think, is the bigger question. There is the missing link, which has never been solved. There is no creature between apes and man. Homo sapiens kind of just popped up. Man goes approximately back, if we can believe the real science, millions of years, and that there's been a Homo sapien species that has went back. And I tend to believe all this stuff. I don't think man may or may not have popped up, but certainly there is a man-like species that was manipulated and kind of jumped its evolutionary cycle because it takes so long. But again, we're not getting any information on this. We're not told about anything. They're not talking about the human race. They're not talking about any of this. They try and get information. He overhears conversations about them working with the military for the moon landing and has no information there. I heard something about the moon landing. Okay, well, that's important information that you don't give no details on. Everything else, there are no details on. You would think that creatures like this, who have children and teenagers, like the Greys are talked about, the wild teenagers, they're watching James Dean movies in the 60s and all that other stuff. I guess, surprised they didn't have motorcycles and go out there and act like Marlon Brown.
Well, yeah, we're the aliens. We want to ride around the city and play like demons. Yeah.
And of course, they're not grabbing booze, women, drugs, none of this stuff. They're just partying, they're partying their little ships that they crash. None of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense with him. You would think that the extraterrestrials, and we don't know what happened before him, would be interested in finding out how human sexuality is. Wouldn't there be females interested in exploring him? Young guy. They're out there. They have no idea what's going on. Wouldn't they want to see how that works? Wouldn't they be interested in that? And vice versa, for that matter. But of course, you got to remember he's kind of a autistic guy who puts Bible verses and everything there. So the problem is we get into all these areas which just don't make any sense. And, the more you talk about it, the more you go into all the details of these things, the less. So is there some gross information here? Did he have these experiences? What went on? Well, like everything else in life, it always comes down to the fact that it's a little bit too little and very late. There's really nothing to this. He's not telling us anything. His misinterpretation of the Greys and their constant contact with children is totally and completely misunderstood by him when they were being abducted and hybrids. This is frightening, and to give the Greys that kind of credit that they're here to help mankind shows the kind of stooge he is. It's dangerous to do that, just as they didn't want to leave their children with you, Chucky. I don't think that we should take them at face value, particularly since they seem to have such extreme abilities and we're so weak. So all of this runs into so many questions, so many things. And I don't know what he could answer or not. I don't think he's had much experience. The things he puts together here, if they're real, he's too busy playing with weather balloons and having a couple of little chuckles with the kids floating around to give us much of anything. He's not quizzing these people. He's not asking things. He said he did get comfortable, and the fear with the tall whites was because he was not hurt for years, evaporated. But we're not getting anything from it. He's not giving us any information. He seems to be giving them information, giving them catalogs. They're wearing clothes and other things. Well, that's nice. Is that really even practical? Can you wear any kind of clothes, especially if you're 6 foot? As a guy who's been tall most of his life, I always had a problem getting clothes that are long. So, the sleeves are short, the legs of the pants are short. Now, this has changed in recent years, but not back then, because tall people were not tall. There's only 10% of the population over 6 feet now. Back in the 60s and everything else, people were a little shorter. So did that fit? And what dresses are they wearing? To do what? When they look like giant eyes and white skin. I mean, that is comical. And certainly Vegas doesn't have a bunch of freaks there in terms of weird-looking people. Vegas, like so many towns, has a lot of ugly, but not freaks. So what did they do? And apparently the government wouldn't give them money, and that doesn't make sense either. They spend $300 million building bases there. They can't give them cash so they can go into town and buy things. They're going to go into casinos, and they're going to win money. And how do you start with your money? These are the kind of things you have to think about. Well, you can't go in a casino even if you can win everything until you have seed money at least. So maybe they can make slot machines bing, ding, ding and get the money out. But you're going to have to at least have the first coin. And the military wouldn't do that, and they didn't talk about that. They didn't like the clothes the generals gave them, and they didn't say anything about that. And they didn't get money. And they didn't seem to be investigating things. They weren't looking for greater things. He had to talk to them about clothes. Well, he was only there for 2 years. Well, what about these thousands of years they've been on Earth and they've never exposed to it? Were these new people there? And of course, he talks about newcomers coming there who were hiding behind rocks and everything else. A lot of this stuff just doesn't make any sense. But, unless you're in it and experience it, thinking that some people are all powerful, sophisticated, and know everything is another error when people are just kind of stumbling around, especially if they're from an entirely different culture and species for that matter. But none of these issues are covered. You think you'd want to know, well, how do you reproduce? How do you get children? Well, what is all this stuff? He seems to have some ideas of how long they live. Well, where did he get that from? They live hundreds of years. How? Is that the case? Did they tell him that? So, I would never go back and read these things because you can't really read this very well. The last book and the last major chapter is written like a book about the Greys where you can pick information out. The rest of it is filtered through hundreds and hundreds of pages about his personal life, the conflicts he has, what he goes through, his content, but nothing really to do with extraterrestrials. It's a mishmash of almost soap opera type writings without people contact. This happened, that happened, I'm sick, this is going on, I'm talking. Boring. We want to find out what are these things? And there's no answers to anything. He's not asking questions. When he does, they don't tell him anything, particularly when it comes from the tall whites. But he's not getting many information from them. He states all these things about the Greys, but he doesn't really have any contact with them. And everybody's a kiddie. Can we get good information from extraterrestrial children? Do they know what's going on? Does their comments have value to an adult? Well, I would have problems with talking to modern kids today, and you're going to get a certain amount of information that they understand. And I don't know if I'd be leaving my children with some Army guy, Air Force-y guy. So apparently they weren't too concerned with that, and of course he did build some trust, and the reason why they used him in different areas, because he was trustworthy, whatever that means. So all of this brings us to the same conclusion that we get in almost every one of these things. You get all these contact stories. We've got the famous Whitley Strieber out there who wrote Communion and many other extraterrestrial books and continues to yap about his mouth where he sees aliens every second. He's terrorized by them. They force him to write books. All the things that come with that. They chased him out of his house, even though initially he said he didn't believe in aliens, that he was leaving his northern New York state cabin to go back to Texas to have barbecues on Sundays. I mean, this is what he stated. Now he said he lost the cabin because he didn't have money. Well, how can you? One day it's this, one that. He talks to everybody, including his dead wife and everything else, but he really, again, doesn't have all that much information. He keeps adding to it because people push him, but, everything to him is a metaphysical experience. He's seeing things pop up in front of him. Now, all of this stuff, when you get down to that kind of a level, there are serious problems that have to be dealt with because you're getting into a realm where and I've heard this from several people who've been interviewed, everything's metaphysical to them. This spirit's coming to them, they have this and that. Well, if you're living in that kind of an altered consciousness where these are just happening all the time, you are really going to be mentally destroyed. And it certainly isn't healthy. And can you judge what is real and what's not real if that's the world you're living in, which is totally different from the real world that we consider the real world, because you've opened up and now everything comes to you? Well, that's a dangerous thing, and I warn people against that. Don't open yourself up to these kind of mental attacks on you where your reality is totally different than what you have to live in day to day. So basically, nothing is. Now, how much money he's made from all this, if that's a motive or not, I don't know. But as I've said, it's been stated that was. He does have 5 books. The books are not very informative. It's just his personal little thing. He is a celebrity. He certainly has made money from it. He doesn't seem to need it with his background. But, of course, maybe having all those grandkids, he does need money. And this is his way of leaving something to his grandchildren. So this may be motives for doing all this stuff, which will continue to produce income indefinitely. The family can take over the books on Kindle, and they'll get checks every month from Kindle for the sales of their books. And maybe they can go on with this. Maybe they'll come up with some of their own stories. Yeah, but Granddad really told me this, and I'll write my own book. And maybe he did tell them stories and probably does to this day. I don't think they're hiding this. After all, he wanted to give it to his children anyway. So it seems to me in years to come that there may be a second wave of books of inner information that he didn't share because it was too frightening. But the grandkids or the daughters will get it. We don't know, but this is how life works. And as long as we live in a society that is nothing but you got to make lots of money to just survive on a basic level, that you really can't do anything on your own of interest, you have to constantly make money. And even if he is set in some particular fashion, he's got all these grandchildren, etc., and I don't know how the rest of the family is doing. Well, all of these things have to be taken in consideration. So what happens is you start off maybe with good intentions. As the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Do you start off like this, trying to get a basic story there to pass on, and it turned into a business? He is a celebrity. People give him credit. They go to him. They meet him at seminars. He signs books that he sells, probably other things he sells as well. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The question is, it depends on the individual of how credible and honest they are. Everybody stretches things a little bit, but do you stretch it to the point of breaking? Because it's convenient to you get caught up in your own little delusional belief systems, especially when you're getting those checks every month. What are we to make of all this? And of course, we can't make any of it. People can get into investigating his records, checking out his educational background. And as I've said, there's been other people that it hasn't checked out in terms of the stuff was removed. They didn't want to give him that credit. Does that mean he's lying? Bob Lazar is one of them. So verifying his record or not verifying it is not that much of a help. But of course, it is to a degree. Did he ever really, let's start with square one, did he ever really be part of the military? Was he in the Air Force at that time? So, he claims he has all these awards and everything else, but we don't really know. And we certainly can't go by internet gossip or what other people say on YouTube. And again, proof that he has or have not is not really that much help. We can prove he was in the military. At least that's a step. If it comes back negative, was he there? Well, we don't know because it could be washed. So this is how it all goes. So it's another fascinating story, but the quest goes on. The quest goes on to make contact in a safe manner and try and be taught on a psychic basis, because physical contact is just frightening. It doesn't really do anything, and they don't really share. But the whole idea is, can we somehow get some practical help? Can they expand our psychic abilities to very high levels? Now, this was the case with contact many 30, 40, 50 years ago. People who were contacted by extraterrestrials all of a sudden had strong psychic abilities, and many had healing abilities. Can we do this again and be assisted? And what else can they assist us with in general? These are real entities. Whether this story is real or not is unimportant. Extraterrestrials are out there. There are potentially 60, 70, maybe hundreds of different species have come to this planet, and one way or another, this is a fact. They are interacting with our society on one level or another. This is a fact. But who cares? People who tell me they're rich, I say, who cares? Your rich does nothing for me. The bottom line is, how can we access this as manifesting scientists to empower ourselves and seek higher credible gnosis? So, here we go again. Interesting reading, but no answers.